Oh, I missed the alarm and I need to go to work. Shoot. This week, I'll give you a little bit of insight into my process. This is also a great example of how actual UX work sometimes happens. Hang on, I get back to that later. I just missed my alarm, and here's a list of what I usually do in the morning. I first get up, I then brush my teeth, then I take a shower, I dress up, I eat breakfast, and then I read the news, I water the plants, I make myself something for lunch, I put on shoes and a jacket, and then I leave for work. Here's the problem though. That's what I do when I have lots of time and I didn't miss my alarm. So now that I missed the alarm, and the question is, what parts of my process are critical and what parts can I leave away? Let's remove the parts that are not critical. Let's reduce the scope of my morning routine. This might make up for the time I just lost by oversleeping. I could start by not brushing my teeth, but that's nasty and that stays on the list. I could skip the shower. That might actually work. I showered yesterday evening after doing sport. That might still be alright for today. I could not eat this morning and maybe grab something in the office. And the news, they will be there later as well, so I'll skip that. And today, no water for the plants. I can also do that in the evening. And lunch, well, that's something I can get around the office for sure. I'll skip that as well. Now, the list is much shorter. From initially 10 steps, I removed 5 and now the list reads like this. I need to get up, brush teeth, dress up, put on some shoes and a jacket, leave for work, and that's it. What does this all have to do with work or UX in general? Well, it's simple. We don't have an ideal world. When you first learn about the UX process, you get the ideal world picture. Research, analysis, user interviews, testing, multiple iterations. But in reality, things often look a bit different. Someone needs something now. Or even better, yesterday. So the question always becomes, what can you leave away while still delivering something? The question usually becomes about the balance of the following 3 criteria: time, cost, and scope. And if one of these criteria is changed, usually another one needs to change as well in order to make up for it. If that does not happen, this will lead to an overall lower quality. You might have heard of the following statement: good, fast, cheap. Choose 2. This means, for example, you can get something fast and cheap, but it won't be good. Or you get something fast and good, but it won't be cheap. Or how about good and cheap? That'll take quite long until you get it. And if you face a situation where you have to deliver something in a very short amount of time, the criteria you're still able to address are scope and costs. But if you have a limited amount of time, throwing money at the problem might not really solve it. Hiring people and onboarding them and coordinating them actually takes a huge amount of time, so you still could reduce the scope. Leave features away. This works, but only to a certain degree, as it is quite hard to balance these requirements. The result is usually not great. The quality will suffer. Need another example? Here's a real-world example, these videos. The past 4 videos had a different time constraint than the previous ones. I'm not going to be at my place for the next 2 weeks, but in order to maintain a weekly video schedule, I need to make more videos per week. And in order to manage that, I changed the time I have for each video and also reduced the scope. So instead of my regular schedule, I made more videos, and in order to make that happen, I reduced the scope of each one and also the time I had for each one. And for sure, I didn't manage to keep up the quality of the videos. But I hope to pick this up as soon as I have the time again. And one more thing. How does this apply to the UX process? As I mentioned before, I lead a team of UX UI designers at work. And if they have little to no work experience, they take what they learn from university or UX courses as a de facto standard that cannot change. But in reality, the UX process is often not perfect. Why not? Well, because we have the same constraints as any other project: time, cost, and scope. This all will result in the quality we deliver. Again, this means if we only have a short amount of time to do our job, we need to change our scope in order to maintain a certain quality. If you take the UX process I typically follow, you would usually do the following. First, define the problem. What are you trying to solve? Really understand the product you're working with and how it functions and what problem the user has or what feature wish the product manager brings to you. Then you collect the requirements. Here you try to get as much additional information as possible in order to not miss anything when you work on the project. Work out all alternatives. Not everything needs to happen on paper, but make sure to play things through in your head as well. Be aware of pitfalls and other things. Do market research and some competitor comparison in order to see what's out there and to take it into consideration. Think through the consequences, risks and options for all the alternatives from the previous step just to get a whole picture. And then decide. What are you going to do and which implementation you will work with for now? Realization. Here you start with the wireframe, sketches, mockups and prototypes. Or depending on the project, you might start with story mapping and slicing. This really depends on the project itself. Feedback. Follow up and follow through with the customer in order to gain insights for the next iteration if there's going to be one. Overall, these 7 steps can be put into the following categories: problem, ideation, solution, feedback and aftermath. This is a process that can be huge, and we are usually not working in an ideal world. So if we have time and cost constraints, we can change the scope of things we do. And the more experience you have, the easier it becomes to skip certain steps. Maybe you already have a good understanding of the market or did something similar before. You might be able to jump right into the solution part. To me, the most important part to get right usually is the problem part. If you don't understand the problem, you cannot solve it. So better make sure to really understand it. If you want to reduce the effort here tremendously, you might be able to skip user interviews. You might have a good product manager that already did the necessary steps. You might also have to do a feature that all the competitors already have, and you basically just have to do a copycat version. Just be aware that you will never get the full picture of everything. So always ask yourself if what you got is good enough for now. Good enough to move on, and if you missed something, you might be able to adjust later. Reduce the amount of market research and the amount of competitors you look into. Instead of thinking through a lot of alternatives, start with just one. That might be enough. Remember Jacob's law? People spend most of their time on other sites and gain some experience. This shapes their expectations. So if you create something that's similar to the rest, that might be okay for now. It might even be better than doing something completely different because your users expect something similar to their experience, which again, they might have gone somewhere else. So reduce the ideation part, and this will directly influence the solution part as well. Don't make tons of versions. Start with just one. Stick with it and decide if it's good enough for now. You could come back later when you have time to make an optimized version. Don't be fooled here. If it's good enough for now, it will take quite some time until you get the chance to actually change it again. And finally, the feedback and aftermath part. This is something you might be able to skip entirely. You delivered. That's it. Remember, the work world sometimes is very different from the ideal world. Sometimes features get made just in order to match a competitor. But this feature might not be used by anyone. This is just something so your product will not look worse than a competitor in a feature comparison list. Well, I hope this wasn't too much for this video. I hope you learned something and join me again next week when I try to figure out the next steps of the project. Have a great day, and remember, don't challenge your users, challenge us. Well, us as referencing all the UX designers out there. This sounded better in my head and it might work great for an agency, but I'm rambling. Anyway, have a great day. Bye.